This is your Outsiders annotation guide, and it should give you a bit of a guideline of how to annotate your copy of the Outsiders whenever you're doing that. So these are our themes. We've got 4 different levels of annotation. Theme is probably the most basic. Symbols are second to that, they're quite simple. Motifs are a little bit more complicated, and the most advanced is literary devices. So if you're just doing the first 3, that's great. If you're really aiming to achieve your best possible mark for your essay and really develop your skills, you'll want to be doing all 4 for the majority of the book, not for the whole book, I guess. The first theme you're looking at is innocence. So this is they realize that they are in a gang and that sort of ruins part of their childhood, their innocence. And so that is the theme, and its loss that will be discussed. Then there's loyalty and honor, or just honor, as I've got 2 different ways here. This is sort of the commitment to the gang and the feeling as though they are a family and they work together. Class conflict is between the Socias and the Greasers. So one of these groups are rich and one is poor, as you'll obviously work out pretty quickly into the book. So when they're talking about not just their gang conflict, but their class conflict, so between being rich and being poor and how that has a different effect on their life, that's what you'll be talking about there. This one, Bildungsroman, is a word that we use in English, but it's from a German derivation, I believe, and it just means coming of age. So it's a little bit quicker than writing coming of age every time. You can use either interchangeably as you feel the need. These are our symbols. So symbols are figurative. They mean more than just the thing that they are, and they typically go just for short little durations within the text. If it goes all the way throughout the novel, or it's an extended symbol, it becomes a motif which runs all the way through and it recurs. So the first symbol, and you want to draw each of these in the inside cover of your novel, and then sort of track along as they occur in the book as well. So the first one is tough hair, which is just part of the way that they recognize who's in the gang and who's not. These ones can be grouped together. We've got Bob's Mustang, guns, knives, and Bob's rings. And each of these are sort of different levels of trouble, I guess, for the main characters as you'll work out as you go along. The car arriving is one thing. If there's knives, that's an even higher level. If there's guns, that's even worse. And the Bob's rings are somewhere in between there as well. These 2 go together, the country and sunset, so they're used to contrast against the kind of more inner city suburban life that they live with the criminal gang that they're a part of. And then when they're in the country, it's almost like part of their upbringing that they weren't really allowed to have as growing up as inner city kids. Gone with the Wind is a book that's referred to a number of different times, and we'll have to research exactly what that means and the significance of it, and then that will give us a little bit more insight into what it actually means as a reference in the story. Motifs, there's just a small number, so it's quite easy. The first one is just literature, so our main character reads books, and he shares his love of reading with the other characters in the story. So anytime a book is mentioned, you're going to put a little symbol of a book next to it to remind you the significance of each of the books that I mentioned. Another one is eyes, so this is used to sort of not just characterize and describe characters, but also indicates a little bit about their personality. The colors gold and green are significant. Stay gold is the key quote that you'll be listening out for as you read. That's a very, very famous quote. I'm sure there's millions of people with it tattooed all on their body rather than all over their body. The most obvious one is just the outsider, so the actual title. The word we use is titular, which just means it's from the title. But this motif is all about who's left out and who's an insider and who's an outsider in society, in the gang, and in other various social groups and situations. These are your literary devices, so the first 3, as well as foreshadowing, should be pretty familiar to you from our creative writing unit. If they're not, basically metaphor and simile are comparing 2 different things in 2 different ways. Simile is saying something is like something else, whereas metaphor is saying that the 2 things are the same in some way. Personification is giving thoughts or feelings to things that do not have thoughts or feelings, and foreshadowing is just sort of casting ahead to the future of the story and indicating what could take place. Irony is just saying one thing and meaning the opposite. Being a little bit sarcastic as well is another way of thinking of it. Characterization is very simple. You just run this alongside big sections where they describe the character, and this will mostly take place in the first chapter and the second chapter, but also as we meet new characters, and also just key descriptions of interactions and relationships. You'll have to think of not just, obviously there's a lot of characterization in the book, but which bits are key that you might want to refer to in an essay later on. Then we've got 2 down the bottom here, allusion and intertextual references. These are similar but slightly different. An intertextual reference is when you refer to a text. So if I said she was reading The Outsiders in class, that is an intertextual reference. If I said something from that book or from that film or from that text, like if I said, she said to the man, stay gold, this is an allusion. It's not as obvious. It doesn't actually tell you where it's from. But if you have already read The Outsiders, then you would get the allusion, and that would enrich your understanding of the story. So with each of these 4 levels of annotation, I hope that gives you a bit of something to go from the start of your book. And then if you like, watch the next video, which is just a very mini short explanation of how to actually get these marks into the beginning of the first chapter of your book, and then you can take it from there.